We want you to be engaged, so feel free to put your questions, comments in the chat room, or you can simply raise your hand. G2G will respond to you. However you want to do it, we want to make sure we get everybody engaged. So I am so happy to have G2G Consulting with us this morning. This is an awesome team. I love working with them. I've worked with them in the past. They helped in another capacity build the policy agenda for an organization I was working for. And all of these members, I have been around them in advocacy, in some sort of advocacy form, and seen them in action. So we are in for a real treat today because these are some amazing people. So I'm going to be quiet now to give our G2G team time to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go right into the training. So Liz and team, however you guys want to get started, please do.
Thank you so much. I am a huge Yvonne Champion fan. She is just an amazing leader. I've seen her lead other organizations and really be the source of change, advocacy, change making, raising awareness. Like, she gets it, she knows it, she lives it. And so super excited to meet all of you through Yvonne, and to hear all the amazing things that you're doing. You really are making a difference. I know it's exhausting, the work that you do, but as people who are in the realm of government affairs and advocacy work, we are seeing that the work you do really does matter. So just wanted to start off with that. We do have some slides. And so what we did as a team, so I'm Liz, Greg, Andrea, and Becky. The four of us will present today. And we've broken up our presentation into parts. And so I think as each of us starts to speak, we'll give our background. So that way you don't have to remember who's who. So I think I'm kicking things off. So whoever is putting the slides up, we can maybe get started with those, if that works. Great, thank you. Okay, so I'll start with my own bio. So Liz Powell, I'm the founder of G2G Consulting, which stands for Government to Growth. We are all about helping organizations grow by working more effectively with government. And, my story actually started not with politics, but with being an activist. So when I was in college, I just started discovering all these problems, and I thought, wait a second, we've got to do something about it. And so next thing I knew, I was organizing demonstrations. I was writing letters to the school newspaper. I was bringing in guest speakers. At the time, HIV was a big issue that a lot of people thought, oh, well, if I'm not gay, it doesn't apply to me. Or, people would try to put people in boxes. And so I found very compelling speakers who were HIV positive to come to campus. And I had fraternities and sororities showing up, people who normally don't care. You could hear a pin drop. We did all kinds of things. We raised money for different causes, sexual violence, racism. We did a huge protest. The Rodney King, we did demonstrations. So anyway, so my heart starts with advocacy and activism. And then I discovered politics, and I started to work on Capitol Hill after graduating. I worked in health and social policy for quite a bit, and then also got my law degree and have a master's in public health. And so I met a lot of leaders, whether they were running organizations that were nonprofits, institutions, or entrepreneurs who were doing great things, but they didn't know how to access government and how to get funding or change policies and really be as effective an advocate as they could be. And that's why I started G2G back in 2007. So I'm going on my 15th year of starting G2G. And over the years, I've been able to grow. And so I started out of Cleveland, and hopefully you can see Cleveland's behind me. And then we grew to be Cleveland, Columbus, and DC. So we do a ton of work with Ohio, but we are also nationally based and do some national work as well. So we do federal, state, and local advocacy work. So that's my background. That's a G2G background. And as I said, my teammates will each give their background as we get started. So the first exercise we want you to think about is, have you ever advocated or participated in an advocacy campaign before? Can you just enter in the chat box yes or no? That'll just give us a starting point of how experienced people are in the world of advocacy. Okay, good. Filling them in. No, yes, no. All right. Yes. It looks actually half and half. It looks about 50% is what I'm seeing so far. So that's great. All right, next slide. Please, next slide, please. All right, so advocacy with impact, that's what we're going to cover today. I think you can go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna go over a little bit about G2G. I already gave you my background. Talk about your priorities. I think that's number one. You have to know what it is that you need funding for, what policy needs to change, what is the problem you're trying to address. And then we want to take a look at how does government work? And the way government works really revolves around budgets and money, which, you know, makes sense. So we want to make sure you understand that process. And then how advocacy works. And that's all about getting organized. Or as one congresswoman said to me, get loud. So we're going to talk about both. And then we're going to give you tips for advocacy so that you are empowered to do this yourselves. And we'll close out with some case studies and then final tips, final takeaways. And we want to answer all your questions. So we've planned plenty of time for Q&A. Next slide, please. All right. So I gave you my background. So since I started the firm, we've raised over $320 million for our clients. Now, those are not all nonprofits. So it's been a combination of sort of high-tech innovators. Many are in that health space. Many nonprofits though as well. It's been a mix of folks, and many in Ohio, although not exclusively. And we've led tons of advocacy campaigns, again, federal, state, and local level. Organized State House days, big fan of those. I think those are really, really effective. And even with this crazy, you know, COVID world that we're in, we've still been able to do tons of Zoom briefings that have been really effective, really educated people, and established the expertise of the organization. So I highly recommend those. Capital fly-ins, again, once we can move about freely in a post-COVID world, if we have that. And then crafting legislation. And that can be from a full bill to just a couple lines that you insert in a bill. But that's really key, is that when you can deliver that to the staff and say, this is exactly what we need to do to address the problem, that makes it so much easier for them. Messaging, a lot of times you will not get through unless you take time to have a tailored message. So we work a lot on messaging to make sure that it will resonate. And then strategies, really being thorough, no stone unturned about how to be most effective in our advocacy efforts. And then building relationships, absolutely key. You need to build that trust so that you become a resource and you're not always going with your hand held out, but rather you're a resource, you're an expert, which you all are. And we need legislators and public officials and agencies to know that. And then making a difference. We're all about making a difference. That's why we're in this business in the first place. Next slide, please. Okay. This one I'm going to turn over to Andrea to describe, and just want to emphasize for this exercise, although we say 1 to 3 words, one word works the best. So Andrea.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. My name is Andrea Harless. I work in G2G's office in Columbus, Ohio, but I have to say, I love the Northeast Ohio representation here. I live in Columbus, but I'm from Youngstown, so Northeast Ohio always has my heart. So Liz shared her kind of advocacy background. So I wanted to share, I was kind of racking my brain, like, what's the first thing I ever did in advocacy? And when I don't know, my team knows this, when I was 14 years old, I wanted to volunteer at an animal shelter and I wasn't allowed because I was too young. And I said, what can I do? And they said, well, we really need someone to help us with our campaign around spaying and neutering your pets. So for the next 6 years, I actually stood up the whole advocacy campaign at as a 14-year-old, which is not surprising to anyone that knows me, that I would be the outspoken 14-year-old. But I stood up the whole advocacy campaign around spaying and neutering pets at my local animal shelter. So that's where I got started. I say it as my dog sits right next to me. I love animals. So that was what appealed to me now and then. So, but yeah, my background with G2G, I've been with G2G for 3.5 years now. I started in state government, working in the state Senate for a member there. And then I also worked at the county health department here in Columbus. I love G2G. I love the work that we do and the different campaigns that we work on. So we're so excited to talk to you guys today. And starting with, we want to kind of assess, this is like just a fun little activity. assess what your priorities are. So when you think about the work that you do every single day, what are some key issues, needs, challenges that you come across? I heard there's a bunch of people on here that do heat. So obviously that's an issue for you. That's a challenge that you're working through. What issues positively or negatively affect your organization and those that you serve? If you could take a magic wand and wave it abracadabra and change or improve something, what would it be? What issues would you want legislators to be talking about to help the people that you serve and to help what you do every day? So I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes. And like Liz said, this works best if you do like 1, 2, 3 words, not long paragraphs. And just anything that comes to mind. You can have 50 words, you can have 2, whatever comes to mind when you think of your key issues, your needs, your challenges. We will start there. So find the
Hey,
timer on my
Andrea,
phone.
if I could just jump in real quick, because we did this exercise as a staff on another matter, and just be real free flowing with your thoughts. So like, don't feel like you have to put all your answers in the chat box once. Just like put one down that first comes to mind and hit send and send it to Andrea. And you can look at what your colleagues are putting in, and boy, they may have something that sparks another idea. So this is just a really good brainstorming session. Just start firing them off one at a time. Just keep hitting send, and Andrea's going to collect them all. So sorry,
Yeah.
Andrea, I thought that might help.
No, anything that comes to your brain, just throw it in the chat box. All right, so I'm going to set the timer. Go ahead.
It's good. Keep firing. Yep. So what Andrea's doing is she is typing each word into this program, and we're going to show you something really cool in about a minute or two here once we get some more words. Shorter words are always better. I mean, one word is always best, 1 to 2 words. Good, all good issues. Yep. And it's okay to repeat. If something's important, it doesn't matter if someone else wrote it, you should still write it, because that's part of this exercise too. It's great. Yeah. Yeah, funding. We're definitely seeing funding a few times. That's good. Any other final thoughts? Throw them in there. Andrea's feverishly typing away. Again, it's okay to repeat. If it's important, you want to say it a number of times. Yep. All right. Oh. Yep. Great. Money and funding. We're hearing that a lot. We're seeing that. Yeah. Just give us money. All right, Andrea, how are we doing? Do you need more time? You're on mute. Yeah.
Myself. Yeah, give me like 30 seconds just to grab the last of these words. But yeah, that was good.
Okay. All right. What do people think of the exercise? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Might be too early to tell yet. Let's see what Andrea, what magic Andrea brings.
I'm trying to keep people engaged while Andrea does her typing.
All right, my fingers are fast, but sometimes not fast enough. Okay,
Yeah.
So now I am going to share my screen. So what we did here, this is called a word cloud, and you'll see very quickly. Give me 1 second, make sure this fits on the screen. What it does is it pulls the words that we've used, and whatever words are used the most or the biggest, the ones that are used, less or smaller. But I think we will very easily see what words are very important to you guys. Which one is in the middle? G2G's favorite word, funding.
Your screen hasn't popped up yet, Andrea.
Oh, it says you're sharing your screen.
Yeah, I'm still seeing,
Yeah, do you need me to stop, Andrea?
Yeah, I would say maybe if you stop, it'll let me. To pop up.
yep, yeah, we're
No.
good.
Yeah, it's great. So Andrea, the big words are the ones that you saw the most?
Yeah, so the bigger the word, the more it was repeated. So collaboration, funding, poverty, educating, health, probably mental health.
So I guess I would ask, and people can unmute themselves, is there anything surprising or not surprising from this? Or questions that you have for your colleagues about what they meant by a certain word?
I think I would like a little bit more. I saw rules.
Mm.
Are we talking about, is that an issue? The author, like, are we talking about some of the guidelines that we are being given and how restrictive they can be, or what does that mean?
Good question. Is the author of that word or authors willing to chime in and kind of tell us what your thoughts are regarding rules?
Maybe rules around funding or around some of the government programs that you're helping your clients access.
Yeah, maybe so. That's what I was thinking too. I know that many of the programs, their hands are tied when it comes to being able to provide certain services for clients. So, okay, that's good. Thank you.
Maybe more clarity on software. Are we talking about Ocean?
Talking about OSHA, is that what you said?
Ocean, that's what I said. I just didn't understand software.
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
So G2G Team, just so you know, Ocean is one of the software systems that we use in the Community Action Agency to be able to report, funding, the grant report, things like that, your outcomes, programs, all of it.
Great.
And that's something that you use, all your community action agencies use across the state.
I'll stop sharing so we can keep moving along.
So Yvonne, if you don't mind putting the slides back up.
Okay. Next up, we want to talk about how government works, which is really the budgeting process. But just high level, super high level, remember your government class. 3 branches of government, executive, legislative, judiciary. And so the executive, a lot of people think, and Trump thought this, that he could just kind of do whatever. Well, you can't, whether you're the governor or the president or mayor. It's actually pretty limited what you can do, but you certainly have the podium. So that's the biggest power there. And then within the executive, you've got all the different federal departments or state departments, and they issue rules to implement laws that have been signed into law and passed by the legislature. So there is that. There's actually quite a bit of power. We've seen a lot of changes with the rulemaking process on the federal level in particular. That's something that we're really active in. And then legislative, they're the ones that actually draft the bills. So when you hear like President Biden's budget or President Biden sends a proposal over to Congress, it's just a proposal. It's not a bill. It's really up to Congress to turn that into a bill. And so there's a lot of power between both entities to actually shape our laws. And that's the brilliance of our Constitution and how they formed our government. Judiciary is just making sure it actually is constitutional. And so the judiciary cannot write laws or rewrite bills or what have you, but the effect is to change the law. They can do that. So that's sort of a basics of the 3 divisions of government. Again, whether it's federal, state, or, local level. So every 2 years, we have a new legislative session in Congress and in Ohio in the State House. Sometimes there's huge changes with elections and sometimes there aren't. So paying attention to that's important because that does influence who controls things. And so what was the big change that we saw last November? The Senate completely flipped to Democratic control from Republican control. The White House flipped from Republican to Democrat, or some may say from crazy to Democrat. But that has huge implications for what policies and funding levels are then going to be prioritized and how you shape your message as an advocate. So those are things to be paying attention to. And then, as I said, the budget legislation is key. That actually has to pass every year. And what's distinctive, we'll get into this further in Ohio, it's every other year that they do the operating budget. And then that alternating year is what we call the capital budget. On the federal level, every year they just do one budget process, but they break it into 12 different appropriations bills. So slightly different, but these, any bills that have to do with money, they have to get passed, right? Because we have to pay for things in order to run government and all these programs. So that's why we like to start our education of how government works with the budget process, because if you understand this, then you can start to influence it and you can insert language that either changes policies or allocates funding or directs funding. You can actually be very, very effective maneuvering this process. So next slide, please. So at the federal level, and I'm hoping you can see this okay. It's kind of tiny font, but we'll make sure you guys get a copy of these slides. I have to actually cheat and make it bigger on my computer. So first off, in the summer and the fall is when you really want to start to be figuring out what your needs are. Is it a policy change or is it a funding request? Like, what is it that you need? And start to figure out your messaging. And the way that we recommend doing messaging is in terms of problem, solution, results. So it's the problem that you're trying to address and include statistics. In fact, the more you can tailor it to your region of the state, the more it's going to resonate and connect with the members of Congress, the state legislators, the local level, council members, mayor that you're working with. So it's really important to track your metrics of how bad that problem is that you're trying to address, whether it's poverty, health, vaccinations, housing, lead, exposure, like whatever that issue is, you just really want to make sure that you can quantify that problem. And then talk about the solution, how your program or your services are uniquely qualified to address that and to resolve that problem. And then the results, if you're given, funding or a policy change or included into legislation, then you can, vaccinate 500 more kids per week, or I'm making it up, but you know what I mean? You want to have numbers and metrics as much as possible for this messaging. And it has to be simple. You can't use, acronyms that no one understands, but experts like you, it's got to be relatable. Think about things like that. So that's the messaging. So it really does take some time to figure out what your needs are, to get your messaging down, to get your internal ducks in a row. Engaging, your community, your board, all those types of things. And so this white paper is that problem, solution, results. That's our messaging. So once you have that organized, then you want to start meeting with your representatives and senators and explain what this white paper says, like who you are, the problem you're trying to address, the solution, and then what you need. Is it a policy change? Is it a regulation? Is it funding? And then you want to start to work through that process. So at the top of every year, so January is when they start up again. And interestingly, the new Congress comes in about January 5th, but the new president isn't sworn in until the 20th. So you actually have this weird gap of a new legislative session without the new president yet, which is what happened this year. But usually like next year, once Biden will have been in his second year, he'll do the State of the Union address at the end of January. And then February, he'll release his budget. That's the normal time frame. Because it's a new president, and this happens every new president, that first new budget proposal is delayed. But usually it's supposed to be that first week of February. And that tells Congress and all of us, oh, this is what the president is prioritizing. And from then on, every decision by Congress is compared to that president's budget proposal. But again, it's just a proposal. The committees then try to figure out, okay, what do we want to do in response to this? Do we agree and we want to prioritize this program? Or no, we don't care about that. We want to fund something else. And so a lot of that decision making happens in the spring. So from February to March, even April, is that time when you really want to be making your submission of whether it's specific language to put into a bill, or we've got this huge poverty problem in Cleveland. And there are, we need more funding for these kinds of programs to tackle this issue. Therefore, you should include this in this bill. Like those types of advocacy pushes, you really want to be doing February to April. Each congressional office then submits to the committees what they think is important. What are the top issues that should be funded, or what policies should change? And then these in the Appropriations Committee, and there's one in the House and one in the Senate. And within that, there's 12 subcommittees. So each of those are broken into issue areas. So there's one subcommittee alone for labor, health and human services, and education. So all the key issues are that one subcommittee. There's a totally different subcommittee for defense, totally different subcommittee for commerce, justice, and science, a different subcommittee for transportation and HUD issues. So it does get scattered depending on what your issues are that you want to influence, but a bunch of them are in that labor, health and human services, and education one. So in the House and the Senate, you have the labor, health and human services appropriations subcommittee. So that means you want to be talking to both the House and the Senate about your issues and what you think needs to be in that bill or shaped in that bill. So April to July, they then do hearings where they bring in the Secretary of Health and Human Services, for example, today. Actually, Secretary is testifying today before a health committee. So they come, they testify, and then they start to figure out what are the numbers? What are we going to fund for different programs? And they will take into consideration that advocacy that was done earlier in prioritizing. So it's really, really important. And again, the more you can relate your problem and your solution to that member's district, the more likely they're going to say this is a top priority to the committee. So then each of those 12 subcommittees have hearings. They then create their one bill. They include funding levels. They include policy tweaks. For example, a big one, once the Democrats took control, they put in language about CDC being given money to do research on guns, which had been banned for decades. So that was like a new policy measure that they tucked into an appropriations bill, for example. So there's other, big changes that can happen within these bills. So once you know, the House is always before the Senate. And the reason why is because in our Constitution, it says all funding measures must start in the House. So the House is always ahead of the Senate. So by June, July, you should know what's in the House bill. And then hopefully by end of July, but sometimes it's pushed all the way to September, you'll know what's in the Senate. August is a recess, and that is a great time to invite members out for tours, come meet the people that you serve, meet with board members, have them see exactly what you're doing, because it's very different than just hearing about it in a meeting to actually come and see it. So really recommend that in-person meeting and tour. And then in September, October timeframe, they come back together and they start to figure out what's the final version going to look like, because the House and the Senate have to come together with one final version. And ideally they do it for each of the 12 bills, but they might not. And in fact, the majority of times they come up with this big omnibus bill and they just shove it all in there in the final hour in November, December. And especially in an election year, they'll take off in October and say, oh, nope, we got to go get elected. And then they'll come back and finish it off. So the advocacy campaign goes on throughout that entire year. You're trying to shape that entire process. And if there's some language tweak or funding line you're trying to get in, if you get it in one, so if you get it in the House bill, but not the Senate bill, you usually should be able to survive the final version, and vice versa. Just the Senate one, not the House one, usually you should be able to survive the final version. So that's that budget process. Now, along the way, there are authorizing committees. There's like 20 of them or more that are doing authorizing bills. So they might authorize the Higher Education Act or Elementary and Secondary Education Act or Public Health Act. Like there's authorization bills that are going into a lot of detail about specific programming. And those happen probably every 5 years, and sometimes they get delayed. Like the transportation bill has been delayed, so it can be 10 years. So those are happening alongside this graph that you're seeing of just these appropriation bills. But the appropriation bills have to get done every year. So it's like a moving train that you can jump onto and add your advocacy push. Simultaneously, you can be working with those authorizing committees, but just be aware those other authorizing committees are only doing legislation every 3 to 5 years, sometimes even longer. So I wanted to make sure that I explained that nuance and why we focus on the budget so much. And I know this is a lot of detail and it's probably annoying and overwhelming, but we're here for you if you have questions. And so hopefully it's just a little bit helpful. But with that, I'll pass it off to my colleague.
Thank you. Yes, it seems like a lot, but again, that's what we're here for. Exactly what we're here for. I always say my favorite thing about my job is I know what I know and you know what you know, and that's why we make a great team. So the state process is similar to Congress. I think it's a little less complicated. I'm not going to get too in depth on this. The big difference that you want to know about the state in Ohio, all states are different. The big difference about the state is that we do a biennial budget. So we do a operating budget. So what funds the operating of the state every 2 years, which is usually in the odd numbered year. So this year. And we do a capital budget, which funds bricks and mortar projects every on the even numbered years, excuse me. So that's typically how we work in Ohio. Something else that's a little bit different about the state is that, you know, you'll see in Congress all the time, they have a continuing resolution. They just keep pushing and pushing when their fiscal year or when they get their funding in. The state of Ohio is typically not like that. We are pretty strict about getting the budget signed on June 30th. So our timeline is much shorter and we're a little more strict about it. But similar to what Liz was talking about, it's a year-long process. You're not just sprinting for 6 months and then you just kind of sleep on the off months. You know, we start early on, summer, fall with our messaging, or if you received money in the budget with doing like events or media or engaging your legislators. And then during that time, I won't go through the steps of it going through the process, but it's similar to Congress where it's goes to the House, goes to the Senate. You do a lot of meetings, we get amendments drafted. You know, our timeline is just a little bit different than it is in Congress. And you know, the thing about the budget, and I think what Liz is really trying to drive home, is this is an opportunity for you to jump on a moving vehicle and get what you need done, whether it's policy, whether it's funding. I remember when I first started working in the State House, someone said, this is a budget year. And I said, oh, I'm not very good at math. How am I going to do a budget? And they're like, you don't need to know math to do a budget because it's a lot of policy and it's a really great opportunity to get what you need into a bill that absolutely positively will move and will pass. If you're on a bill that's not moving and not passing, it's not worth it, but the budget will move and the budget will pass. So I'm going to go to the next slide because I think there's some good information here to kind of talk about the pieces, kind of wrap up what we've been talking about in this, excuse me, in this portion. But you know, the way we really like to talk about government, and the way that I think it's best to explain government, is that it's like a puzzle. I don't know if anyone else took up like puzzling during quarantine, but when you have a puzzle, what's most important is that you have all the pieces to it. There's nothing more frustrating than when you've done a whole puzzle and in the end you're missing one piece. Government is exactly the same way. You could work really hard, you could do all of the right things, but if you're missing that one piece at the end, you're not going to get the result that you wanted. So it's really important that you know all of those pieces. And again, like I just said, this is why we make a great team, because we know what all those pieces are and you help us fill in why it's so important that we do what we do. So, you know, of course, it's important that you know the legislative process, what we were just talking about with the timelines, the agencies, you know, leadership committees, the advocates, the lobbyists, the real people. It's important that you know the people, but it's also really important that you know the current events that are happening and how those events might play into your advocacy campaign. So obviously, you know, the global pandemic isn't something that anyone could have missed. But when we're talking about the budget right now, every policy that we're putting forth, every budget request we're putting forth, we put a COVID lens on that. And how does this funding get us post-pandemic? Where is it going to push us to? And how are we going to use this to continue to grow and build our state and the people that, you know, your nonprofit or your organization serves? That's so important. And sometimes there's, you know, smaller nuances or smaller kind of media events that are capturing attention, but it's really important to know those things and to know what's going on with the people to which you're speaking. It's also really important to engage and consider your community members and the community impact that you have. We hear legislators say all the time, it's so great when a CEO of a nonprofit comes in and tells us about their good work. But of course, the CEO of the nonprofit is going to tell you they do good work. What is really, really engaging is if you bring in a student or a constituent or somebody that is involved in the program, someone that can say, I use this program, this is what it's done for me, and this is the position that I'm in now because of this program. That is what's really engaging. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle that sometimes people forget, how important it is to not just say you have a need, but to show that your need is also working and your need is your program is working. So that's a piece that I think sometimes people will miss. And again, this probably seems a little overwhelming, but this is how we work together and we make all those pieces into a really nice, complete, of course, puzzle. I think we can go to the next slide. So our next slide is just, we want to just take a quick break. I know we just went through a lot of information and see if anyone has any questions just about government and how it works in the process. So feel free to unmute yourself or to type your question into the box. If not, we can keep moving, but
Andrea, I have one question. When you were talking about obviously the pieces to the puzzle and like some of the nuances, can you talk to us a little bit more about the LSC and how important that is to the whole advocacy and building legislative process? I know when I was a lot more active, that was one of those nuances that sometimes it just gets in your way and you're like, wait a minute, where does this come from? So could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yes, the LSC is very, very important, and it's something that I'm sure most people in the state of Ohio have no idea even exists. So LSC stands for Legislative Service Commission, and they are the people that actually write the bills. They write the amendments. They go into the Ohio Revised Code or the Constitution or wherever they have to go. They do the research. These are huge brainiacs, very, very smart people that go in and they write out what the bill will look like. They make sure that it makes sense. They make sure that it will balance. There are people in LSC who just do the fiscal piece of it. So, you know, in the budget, our budget has to constitutionally be a balanced budget. So they're the people that go in and say, okay, if I am giving $100,000 here, where am I cutting the $100,000 there? Or what's the fiscal impact of a road naming bill? Very simple example, but there is a fiscal impact because you have to put up a sign that costs money. You know, to look at those fiscal aspects of it. The LSC is absolutely crucial to what you're doing, and you know, we wouldn't exist without them. I could never write those things. But yes, it is very important that we are talking to them. Typically, the legislators will do the communicating with them of what we need. But like as a lobbyist, they'll send a bill back to us and we'll look through it. And if there's something that isn't adding up to what we wanted, we have it changed and we tweak, but the LSC is very, very important to what we do. I don't know if anyone from my team has anything to add.
Andrea, what I would add to that is one of the things that I learned very quickly when I was in Columbus and working on legislation was, to your point, that the legislators are the ones who communicate with LSC. And I stepped on a few toes by trying to communicate with them directly. So LSC is actually a nonpartisan group. It's their state employees. And so when we as constituents take ideas to the legislators, the legislators come with their own ideas, they craft what they want the legislation to look like. And then the LSC people are the smart people that go into the revised code and say, well, we've got to change this section or tweak that section. And so, yeah, it's an interesting puzzle piece that, to Andrea's point, I mean, they're the brains behind our I don't know if they're the brains, but it couldn't get done without them. But it's important to know that they are nonpartisan and you have to have permission to talk directly to them from the legislator who's sponsoring the legislation.
Anything else? Any other questions? All right. I think
So I think let's go to the next slide because I think I might be up. Oh no, we've got another activity.
I can set. This is similar to what we just did, of course, but we just talked about policies, and policies are important. We talked a little bit about government and how that works and what that process is. But now we're really going to get into that advocacy piece, the importance of how we advocate and what we do with advocacy. So same as before, we'll just do a minute or two, 1, 2, maybe 3 words. What does advocacy mean to you? When you think about advocacy, when you think about advocating, when you get really just like ready to go about something, what comes to mind and what do you think of? So if you want to throw that in the chat box, we're going to do another one of these word clouds. Oh, I love that voice for the voiceless.
Gladiators, I like that one.
Yeah, these are great.
Those are some really awesome ways to capture
Yeah.
what advocacy is and what you're trying to achieve through advocacy.
Hey, Andrea, I'm just curious, are you able to save that cloud like so that there's like a printout of it later? Because we could always share it with Yvonne and.
Well,
Yeah,
I screenshot the first one. I did screenshot the first
Oh,
one.
good.
Okay,
I was gonna
good.
say I think I saved it, but I don't really know. So,
Sorry, I know you're
luckily you have that.
multitasking as you pull this together.
If there's something spelled wrong, that's why. All right, I think I forgot cheerleaders, and I love that.
That's an
So I
awesome
think
material.
being a cheerleader is so important. All right, so I'm going to share.
Listening, that's so key. Understanding what you're advocating for and who needs a voice.
Sharing solutions, support, and voice are kind of the biggest ones, and I would completely agree.
Yep.
Completely agree.
Stories.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that one, Becky. I love
Yep.
that the stories made it in there.
Storytelling.
Yep.
Statistics that Liz mentioned earlier, are absolutely critical to describing the problem, but it's sort of like a combination of having that qualitative, example of what your challenge is that you're trying to change or make a change or find a solution for, but also that storytelling is so impactful. And sometimes you have to do a combination just in your actual verbal meaning, because that's, you don't know, the person you're talking to, if they which resonates better with them, a story or the data, and usually it's a combination of both.
I also like resources and recommendations. I think that's really important. That's something we talk about all the time, is how important it is for, and one thing you'll hear us always offer at the end, if we can ever be a resource to you, if you're crafting a bill, if you just have a question, you guys are the experts in this field. And if legislators are asking questions or they want to know something, we want them to come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking of crafting this bill. What do you think of it? What's your recommendation? That's so important in advocacy.
Yep. The two-way street. Like somebody
Yep.
wrote that advocacy is a two-way street, and it's so true. And it's great to develop these relationships, with some of these political influencers, the decision makers, the legislators, etc. When you don't have a request up front, to say, hey, here's all the work we're doing. Here's the people. I'm an intake coordinator in Stark County. I talk to people every day who are facing X, Y, and Z challenges. And so if you need to understand what those challenges are, state representative X, come to me. I can describe them for you. I talk to these people every day.
All right, great. I think we can, Yvonne, if you can hook us up with the slides again. Thank you.
Oh, it's me again. I think after this, I stopped talking. Well, and Liz covered a lot of this when she was going over the timeline. So just to dive a little bit into some of these things that I think are really important. Liz talked a lot about assessing needs, and that's something that we do very early on in the process. And there's a lot of little pieces to assessing needs that to think about when you're doing it. So when you're thinking about assessing your needs, so you're thinking about assessing them, policy or funding. It's important to think about what you want to change, think about what you want to influence, think about a budget request you want to make or appropriations request if it's federal level that you want to make. And what you can, sorry, my computer screen just went crazy. When you're looking for funding, when you're looking for a budget or a policy request, you have to make sure you're asking for something that's very reasonable. I think that's always very important. Recently, we had a meeting with a legislator. We were making a budget request and we were asking for like $200,000. And he goes, man, that sounds so easy because the person before you wanted $50 million. And, it's, maybe for that organization, $50 million wasn't as wild as it sounds, but you don't ever want to come in and ask for anything that's, going to make it look just unreasonable and like that you wouldn't be able to do anything with it. You need to be able to achieve with what you're asking for as well. You don't want to ask for a policy change or a budget request. You're not going to be able to show any results from it. That's another really important thing to think about when you're assessing those needs. Legislators don't know everything. They don't know all the issues. They learn the issues from you. And sometimes it can be a super easy fix and they just don't know it because they don't know the problem exists. We've talked to legislators before, and we tell them about an issue and they're like, oh, I had no idea that was an issue. And it's a very simple fix. So when you're assessing those needs, what is something that we can easily fix that the legislators might not know? I just said, I love about my job is that you know what you know and I know what I know. And the legislators love us because we know what they don't know. And we help fill in that gap. And that's really important when you're assessing your needs. Targeting is also really, really important. We have a different slide on this, so I won't talk too much about it, but it's important to remember there are over 500 members of Congress. There are over 100 state legislators. There are thousands and thousands of agency heads and staff and program managers, and you name it. There are a million people you can go out and talk to, but the person you should be talking to is the person that is going to care. Someone said to me once, every time I sit down in a meeting, I think about the fact of how much time I spent in that meeting versus what the actual impact was of it. And if you sat in a meeting for 30 minutes with somebody that at the end says, okay, that was probably a waste of your 30 minutes. You want to be talking to your legislator who is in Stark County, who is going to grasp onto what you're saying because it's helping their constituents. If you're working in a mental health space, find a legislator who loves mental health because they're going to want to grasp onto what you do. You don't want to go to a legislator who only cares about agriculture to talk about mental health. You're probably not going to get a great result from them. So targeting is really important, whether it's targeting to your location or targeting to your interest area. Also talking to, majority versus minority. Everyone is important, but if you have a strong pull from the majority, that's always going to be helpful for you. If you have a strong pull from leadership, that's always going to be helpful for you. Targeting is so important. The other thing is messaging. Liz talked a lot about this, so I won't jump too deep into it, but messaging is really, really important. That problem solution results that we talk about. And I think it's important to remember that results are twofold. So results are what have you done? What are you as an organization doing right now? And if you give me this amount of funding, if you make this policy change for you, what potential do you have to do even more? Or if you've received funding or they have changed a policy for you, as a result of that, what have you been able to do? If you can show that the legislature gave you $100,000 and you did this good work for it, same thing, I keep saying this, but we sat down with the legislator the other day and he said, well, that's exactly what I want to see. I gave you money, you showed me results, so now I want to give you more money because you did what you said you were going to do. That's exactly what you want to be doing. Your results are so important. I would say the results are the most important piece of your argument every time. Engagement is also really important, again, with the decision makers, but also with your community. Like I said before, the CEO of a nonprofit is always going to say they're doing good work, but if you bring in a constituent, you bring in somebody that actually is using the program, that speaks absolute volumes about what you're doing. And it really gives a legislator an opportunity to talk to someone that's seeing it from another side. Seeing it in action is also something that kind of goes along with, media outreach and events. This was easier in a pre-COVID world, and hopefully we can see it later, but site visits are so important. I can't tell you how much a legislator gets out of walking around your facility or meeting with the people that you talk to, really seeing what you do in action, those firsthand accounts. If they can't do a site visit, or if it's just something that you don't really see, a round table is really important. Testimonials, we do congressional briefings, we do state house days. This can also even be something like letter writing for maybe someone that doesn't want to speak. If someone gets a little nervous talking, or some people are introverts, letter writing, those action campaigns, anything like that is really important. And I think another important aspect of having events and inviting legislators and those decision makers along is, I always use the example of, if I need $20, I'm going to ask my mom for $20. I'm not going to ask the first person I see on the sidewalk for $20. My mom knows me. She knows I'm good people. She knows I'm probably going to use the $20 for good. But the guy on the sidewalk knows nothing about me. So he's probably less likely to give it to me. And it's the same thing. You don't want to always walk into a legislator's office with your hand held out asking for something. You want them to know you all the time. Know that you're good people, know that you're doing good work, and know that, if they give you the $20, you're going to use it to buy lunch, because that's what you need it for. The last part is follow-up. So follow-up is really important, and it's important that you're following up, timing, as in timing of certain days of the week. If you're trying to talk to an aide or a legislator, probably not a good time to call them is during session, because they're really busy. But maybe if you call them on a Friday or a Monday when it's a little less busy, you have the chance of talking to them. But also timing of just knowing when decisions are being made. So Liz talked a lot about, like having an August recess, or when people are in committees, or people are kind of racking and stacking their amendments or their priorities. Those are the times you want to remind people, hey, we have an ask. Hey, this is what we do. Hey, this is the good that we do. So they're keeping you top of mind while they're making those decisions. You also want to be following up with them very consistently. And we always like to talk about what we call polite persistence. Sometimes you get ignored. Your phone call gets denied, they sent you to voicemail. Your email gets ignored. Sometimes your email gets ignored 5 times. We never want to be rude. We never want to be overbearing or pushy, but there's always a nice way to push your message so you get what you want, but politely. So one thing I love to do is, if I'm not getting a response from someone and I see an article that has to do with someone we're working with, I send the article along. Hey, I thought you'd be really interested in seeing this. By the way, can we get that phone call set up? It's just another reason to push them, but it's a polite way to do it. And you will see that that polite persistence really does pay off, and you often get the result that you were looking for, just because you did it politely. And I think people always appreciate that. And remembering that people are very busy. Sometimes it's not they don't like you, it's just they're very busy. So follow-up is very, very important, and following up consistently and politely is also very important. I think that's all I have.
All right, yeah. Thanks, Andrea. So I think I'm going to take over from here. My name is Greg Kapkar, and I was trained as a social worker. In the early part of my career, I was a case manager for adults with mild to severe mental health issues. And then from there, I went and worked with Ohio Guidestone for about 12 years. And Ohio Guidestone at that time was actually Berea Children's Home and Family Services. And my time with them evolved from being a direct caseworker to really getting bit by the policy and advocacy bug. And that's where I really focused the rest of my career starting at that point. And I went back to school and got my master's in public administration. But at the same time I was doing that, I helped create a government affairs program and public policy program inside the organization. And essentially, it kind of evolved from attending statewide association meetings where we were, kind of dabbling in policy and things like that. But we were seeing other organizations, big organizations in the same space as us, getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from the state of Ohio. And we're thinking, well, we could do that. Why aren't we getting that money? And it goes to really Andrea's point about, they don't know, if they don't know who you are and you're not approaching them, they're not going to give you any money. So we were successful. Once we got our program up and running, we did end up getting some operating money for our childcare centers from the state of Ohio. And I'll talk a little bit about how we did that. And then we also got some capital money from the Ohio budget, and then eventually some operating funding for a school age reading enhancement program through the federal government back when they did earmarks, and then they put a moratorium on them, and then now they came back. I spent the next 10 years after Ohio Guidestone at the Public Children's Services Association of Ohio. We represented a lot of your sister organizations or public organizations like the child welfare organizations or Job and Family Services. And I was the legislative director there. And at the same time, I chaired what was then Have a Heart Ohio, which was a large coalition of human services ranging from preschool to senior and adult services, food insecurity, healthcare, dental access, Medicaid, child welfare, all of that stuff. And actually, I think that's where my path crossed with Yvonne when there was Voices, well, at the time it was Greater Cleveland's Children, Voices for Greater Cleveland's Children, and then it expanded to Voices for Ohio's Children. So anyways, when we look at this slide, anytime I look at this, I think one takeaway, if you're really kind of looking at this, one reference point, I would say it's this, that this slide always reminds me of an elected senator who was really so excited to attend their first banquet after an election. They showed up early, and they were practically the only one in the room except for the staff who was setting up the room. And they happened to notice that this one staffer was putting butter out on the table. There really wasn't not much else going on. So they were just watching this person just methodically going from table to table, just one pat of butter on each plate, and just like one plate, one pat of butter, one plate, one pat of butter. And the attendant got to the senator's table and kind of giving the best winning smile that the senator had, they said, "I really like butter. Do you think I can have an extra butter?" And the attendant said, "Sorry, I treat everyone the same. One plate gets one pat of butter," and on they went. And so the senator was kind of taken aback, and they sat there for a minute just kind of thinking about it and looked around the room, and there really wasn't anybody else hardly in the room. So they got up and approached the attendant who was on the other side of the room just working the tables, just one pat of butter, kind of came up and said, cleared their throat and said, "Maybe you don't know who I am. I'm a United States Senator. I'm Senator so-and-so." And the attendant, without skipping a beat, just said, "Maybe you don't know who I am. I'm the one who gives out the butter." And so this story kind of stresses the importance of the center of this slide. And that center of this slide is you. It's us. Our votes are like butter, and we're the ones who give out the butter. And as citizens, we have something every candidate and elected official wants, whether it's from school board to president, they want our butter. And if you were to ask an elected, every time you go and shake an elected official's hand, or now in post-COVID, like a fist bump or hey, an elbow bump or just a hi across the room, and you say, "Hey, my name's Yvonne, and I live in your district," they're going to hear a little voice inside their head that says butter. And if you mention belonging to a group with dozens of people in the district, that voice in their head says, "Ooh, butter, butter." But then if you identify with a coalition of hundreds and thousands, that voice just turns into a roar. So if you were to ask an elected official which is more important to them, money or votes, the answer that you're going to get from them is votes. They can go outside the district for money, but they can never go outside their district to get votes. And they have to win over 51% of those people with their butter. And those people are us. And so we all have a really powerful voice. And so if we look at this graphic at the 12 o'clock position, developing relationships is key. And Andrea did a really wonderful job kind of laying this out. People are more likely to do things for you if they know who you are. And we will give you examples of how to build those relationships throughout this today, but it really does boil down to, for this piece, having that relationship before you have to ask for something. That's ideal. When I was at Ohio Guidestone and we built our program, we started with the Cuyahoga County delegation. Those were the people that needed to hear from us, because at that time, that the money we were going after, that's where the constituents were. And we mentioned it here before, being pleasantly persistent or politely persistent. It's a motto here at G2G. One example was we were trying to get a hold of a senator at Ohio Guidestone who just wouldn't return calls, but it happened to be during an election year. And so I get it, they were busy. They were knocking on doors for an election, and lo and behold, they knocked on the door of one of our employees. And our employee was like, hey, we've been trying to get you out to see the campus. So remember that butter, that constituent. After he met our employee at their house, living in his district, he actually came out, did a tour. He became our most ardent champion, our supporter. He got us $25,000 in the operating budget. He helped us get $250,000 in the capital budget. He started to come to golf outings. So just building that relationships. And sometimes, you don't always have that relationship before you're going to ask for things. And so you want to, you've got to keep building those. We've got legislators who come on at that are new and all of that. So you want to keep in front of them. You become a resource for them at 3 o'clock on the graphic. We just had an example. We met with a legislator who, we didn't know they weren't a supporter of ours, but after that meeting, we knew they were not. They basically said, I don't see why this is important to government, so we know that we're not going to keep targeting them. At 6:30 on this graphic at the very bottom, what's the impact that your issue has on the constituents in the district? Talking about those statistics, tracking those metrics. How does this impact and relate to people that they are serving? And all of this is building to having some influence in the process and inserting yourself at key pressure points within this process. So let's go to the next slide about targeting. And Andrea did a really nice job of teeing this one up as well, really understanding your lawmakers' personal and professional backgrounds. And there's some lists here that I'm not going to read to you, but all of this can be applied at federal, state, or local levels. And so you really want to take a step back and say, okay, who are the people that can help move my issue through the process? Where do they sit? Who in our staff maybe knows these people or have a relationship? Is there any ground level connection or a personal passion for them? So if you're working on, we've heard a lot about heat or energy, trying to tap into how does this impact their constituents? And then you also have to be cognizant of politics, right? Because every organization I've been at, we have been bipartisan. We work with majority and minority members of Congress. So whether it's Republican or Democrat, we try to find a way to make our issue their issue. And fortunately, I've been throughout my career working on issues that resonate with all of them, but they don't always resonate with them. So we have to be smart about, if they're unfavorable to our position, is it good for us to, do we try to sway them? Do we try to, keep them neutral? How do we want to approach? So you really want to be thinking about, what's the best strategy to move my issue forward? And, obviously you want to be talking with legislators who are in leadership positions, knowing what committees are there, and then you're going to target the leadership and, just building from that center of, here's my issue. It goes out to the district, it goes out to the state level. How does it interact? And then there are also caucuses that you can get involved with, and there are a bunch of caucuses listed here. So just a few slides on targeting, and I think I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. I guess we're going to pause here and ask for any questions. If there are no questions, I see we are kind of getting short on time. I don't want to stifle questions, but maybe we can move along. And Becky, I think Becky's up. forget who's up next. So let's go to the next slide, Yvonne, please.
Actually, I think I'm going to go right before Becky.
Okay.
Because I'm the attorney, I get to talk about what's legal. We always get this question. People are paranoid about what they can and can't do as a nonprofit. You can do quite a bit. You have every right to educate on problems that you're seeing and solutions that you've been able to create. So just keep that in mind. You can do tours, meetings, speaking engagements, all good. Issues, I've been asked this before. Can we be part of an issue campaign? Absolutely. And that's like very common in Cuyahoga County. They always do different kinds of levies and issue campaigns. So you can get involved in those. You definitely can vote, and you should vote. Everyone should be voting. The folks you work with should be voting. Voting drives, getting people registered to vote. Those are wonderful. That's how I first got engaged in politics too, getting people to vote. So all of that is perfectly fine. Talking to candidates, that's all fine. So even a personal check that you write, so I, Liz Powell, write my own check, even though I head up a nonprofit, that's totally legal, that's fine. And the interesting thing is you actually have to report, if it's over, I think it's $200, you have to report who you work for, which is interesting the way our FEC law works, but it is totally legal and it's fine. You just cannot send an email on your work email account to people who work for you or others externally, anyone saying, hey, support this candidate, write a check. You definitely can't do that. But on your Gmail or private account, you could write, Yvonne could say, hey, Liz, I'm going to this event. You want to come with me? That's totally fine on a Gmail, Yahoo, whatever kind of an account. You just can't do it on the work account. You also can't obviously endorse candidates and say, ours is now endorsing the following, candidates. Cannot do that. You can, I talked about contributions, in-kind contributions. Also, you can do that again as a person, but not as an organization or under that affiliation. And then posting things on your website or social media, endorsing candidates, you have to be careful of that as well. So I think it makes sense, but people often are concerned about this. And then the other thing about hiring lobbyists, you can hire lobbyists too. You just as a nonprofit, you can't spend more than 20% of your overall budget on lobbying, and then you're fine. And that's never the case. We've never found that the case. So, so there's quite a bit you can do. So I want to make sure you all know that. And then we'll pass it over to Becky.
Liz, looks like there was a question about that, maybe related to, can you please speak to community action agencies and lobbying and our third parties?
Yes, I kind of wanted to see if my lovely Janice Warner would speak to that.
Oh, sorry.
NCAF, we can advocate for NCAF. And you can also use agency dollars for NCAF, but not CAPPAC. CAPPAC is the lobbying leg of NCAF. So you can talk about NCAF. You can do encouraging staff to contribute to NCAF, but not CAPPAC. And then also there's an arm, CAPFAX, that the agency can use dollars for. OACA's okay, it's a 501c3. OCADO is the 501c4, and that's where their lobbying thing come about. So we can't ask people to contribute to their PAC. We can't ask staff to contribute to any PAC. And I hate to tell the attorney she was right, but she's right. You have to use your personal emails. You cannot use agency emails for things that's about lobbying, but things that we're going to say we're educating on, and that's what NCAF does. They have a lot of training. Same way with OACA. So I hope I answered your question, Sandra, but that's my understanding of NCAF, OACA. And I don't know any AUC. I don't know that acronym.
Oh, that's heat related. So
Okay.
That's the National
Well, I'm
Energy.
sure that's about the same too. We cannot lobby. We have to be bipartisan. We have the what's that law? The Hatch Act that we must follow. We have to follow the Hatch Act. So,
right. Thank
okay.
you, Janice, because I knew it was a little bit different for us as a community action agency. And so our whole purpose for what we're trying to do is we want to have a we want to learn about how to have an advocacy group, but it would be comprised of our customers, our people who, you know, utilize our programs, not us per se, but an outside group.
Yeah, but advocacy is different than lobbying.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so you can use your customers. If there's a cause or anything that we need to go to Columbus for, I said, grab those customers and let's go. I kind of mentioned that today. We talked about healthcare this morning, and that's like one of my passions. It's something I feel something needs to be done with the healthcare crisis within the world.
Thank you, Janice.
Okay, you're so more than welcome.
And that I think is an like incredible segue actually into the next couple of slides, which I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to cover very quickly. A lot of it's been covered already. But I am Becky Watts. I am the fourth member of this team presenting today. I've been with G2G for about 13 years and have done a lot of advocacy campaigns with all different kinds of organizations. I previously worked for a United States Senator, who's now our governor, Mike DeWine, in DC. I worked in the State House in Columbus for the Speaker of the House at the time, many years ago, and I worked at the local level of government as well in the court system before moving on to state government and then federal government. So messaging, which we've talked about already, problem, solution, results. You know, this is so critical, you know, being able, but I love what you just said about, you know, utilizing your customers, your consumers to help you deliver that message. That is so impactful. It's extremely authentic, and it really delivers the message that in most cases legislators need to hear about, like how your community action agency is impacting my life directly, and why, you know, you need to change this law to help achieve that, or you need to insert another way to use the funding. For example, the you know, CARES Act dollars that just came through, that DeWine signed the bill yesterday. And I saw, I think Phil Cole, we talked about that, and I think OACA was just brought up, was there talking about, you know, that work. But, and again, he and Yvonne and we can be in the room with these legislators delivering these messages, but to have that consumer who's on the ground and benefiting from all these programs help tell that story. And of course, with your guidance, you know, bullet points, what's the problem we're trying to solve, what how it's impacting my life directly, here's what we're asking you to do, legislator X, to achieve, you know, Y result. Succinct is critical, but again, just that storytelling and that authentic voice is absolutely you know, crucial. And so what we do a lot of times, just to get back to the slide, is this is to create a one pager. Sometimes it's 2 pages, and a lot of times that's the document that you can pull from when you're writing your initial outreach email, once you've kind of, you know, really honed in on what you want to say in that document. But just keep it succinct, but powerful in terms of what's the problem you're trying to address, what's the proposed solution, or the solution you already have in place that you just need funding for, and then what are the results that you're already seeing or that you anticipate seeing based on your expertise that you and your agency can offer. Next slide, please. Board engagement. We haven't really touched upon this one yet. So I think most of your community action agencies have a governing board. I just briefly looked at, I think it was the first one that hopped on. It might have been Stark County, or maybe Lorraine County. I was just looking at your website, and your board members are people that are obviously very well connected in the community. That's why they're on your board. That's why, you know, you probably sought out their board membership. Them coming to a meeting with a legislator, whether, you know, a lot of times figuring out if they know that legislator first is helpful, but it just shows the commitment, the strength of your organization, the strength of your board, the commitment they're giving of their, one legislator always says, time and treasure, you know, and the fact that they're taking out their time out of their day job as, you know, CEO of X corporation, or as mayor, or as whatever, you know, whatever their day job is, and coming to help advocate is it just speaks volumes. So seeing who they know, inviting them to meetings with legislators, having them participate in events when we can do things in person again, and have, you know, legislators come out and do that site visit, bringing a board member to there, again, just demonstrates that commitment. They can often help engage the media to help tell your story. Next slide, please. And okay, we talked a little bit about this in terms of engaging your community that you serve, your consumers. And there's, you know, just I think when you do talk to them, and a lot of times it's, you want to figure out who's somebody that maybe you've gotten a thank you note from, you know, or somebody that you work with regularly, so you know that they understand and appreciate the impact of your relationship with them. So that's somebody who might be a great voice for your work. You can explain to them why it would be really impactful to help share your story. Action alerts, you know, some organizations like to use these to send out and say, hey, today is the day that, you know, amendments are due, which is in fact, I have to jump off in about 2 minutes to get on a meeting with a legislator to talk about amendments. He's the chairman of the health committee. We've worked for 6 weeks to get this meeting, so I had to take it at this time slot. But amendments are due today, so today's a great day. We're working with some of our, and I'm talking about the state budget amendments in the Ohio Senate. We're working with some of our clients in their communities that they serve to ask them to reach out to your legislator and say, hey, can you please support this amendment in the process? So those types of action alerts, and again, writing the text for them so it's extremely easy is one way to go about it. Inform them on advocacy tools, letter writing, phone calls, emails, etc. Social media, obviously Twitter, etc., is extremely powerful in this day and age. Events, we can go back to State House days eventually, hopefully, but we've been doing a lot, as Liz I think mentioned earlier, we've been doing a lot via Zoom, and they're impactful too. Site visits and tours, and then coalition building. So you obviously, as this whole group together, can be a powerful voice together. Next slide. Okay. And I am going to jump it off and turn it over to my colleagues, but thank you all so much. I'm not sure who takes it from here. Thank you. And so Liz, I might ask you to review some of the case studies that I was going to cover.
Yep, no problem. Okay, so because we need to power through, we're going to just go right to case studies. So we have just a few case studies. We've got a state example around wraparound services. We were able to educate on the problem, raise awareness, and then build support, broad support, secure funding in the state operating budget. I think we'll just make sure you have the slides so you can see the strategy, but it's everything that we've been talking about with targeting and messaging, and a lot of repetition, going back to meet with folks over and over again and making sure we tailor our descriptions to meet their district. Next slide is an example of a state after school programming for youth at risk. We got millions and millions of dollars over the years. It didn't start out that way, but we had to keep going back, keep educating and explaining the need for after school programming, especially for those most at risk of dropping out or having other factors that are shaping their ability to learn. They need a conducive environment for learning, and we need to address those challenges. So we got a lot of funding for that. And this spanned from Stark County over to Lorain, through Cleveland, down to Columbus, Cincinnati, like the whole state benefited from this funding. And then the next slide is a more city one that's focused on Cleveland. They have the community development block grant funding. We were able to get 100% participation. So every member of the city council gave a small amount of money, but together it all added up to a very substantial amount. And with that, we were able to get more funding out of the Cleveland Foundation for this distance learning program as well. We seem to have an education theme, but we've done a lot of different issues. And then this final case study example is federal, state, and local. And we sort of combined a bunch of different efforts that we did on this next slide. So we work to get funding on all levels of government this way, and to change policy at all levels of government. And this is around healthy food access, which is key to healthy living. It directly is tied to obesity rates, diabetes, hypertension, increased health expenditures, Medicaid. So there's lots of different folks that were influenced by this. So we were able to get funding in the state budget for specifically SNAP benefits, so that they could double their amount of SNAP dollars as long as it went towards healthy produce, healthy foods. We were able to do a specific one around maternal and infant health called prescription produce, and got funding specifically for that, and have found huge metrics of success with that program, actually. So we're able to go back to the State House and get more funding for that. We got even more dollars, millions of dollars, around establishing grocery stores in areas where there's no healthy food access. There's only like a 7-Eleven. So we were able to get funds for that and started building those across the state as well. I went to the opening for Euclid, which was pretty awesome. You could see the whole community came out for the opening of this grocery store. It was very, very impactful. It also is job creation, not just the healthy food access. Sugary drink exclusion as an automatic that was included in kids' meals in Cleveland. We worked very closely with the council to change that so that it was no longer an automatic, but it was rather water. And then if the customer wanted to pay to get the soda, or the sugary drink, they could get it, but it wasn't an automatic. But just a simple replacement of water, it actually and dramatically improves the health of kids and families. And then you can see on the right side, the strategy, again, that being targeted in our approach, targeted messaging, working that federal, state, and local level, all 3 levels of government, and lots of testifying opportunities with all of these examples. I think that's really key, especially on the state level and local level. You can do that quite easily. Federal level, it's a little bit more difficult, but there's other ways to insert your expertise there as well. And then we're about to close out just to show that ROI exists. When you do advocacy, you actually, when you spend a little bit of money and effort on this, you get a lot back in return. And then final tips, knowing your needs, as we talked about, figuring out how to communicate that effectively, understanding how the system works, which hopefully you understand better now, messaging, redundancy, repeat is really, really important. Inviting them out for tours, building those relationships over time, sending information that's useful to them based on the conversation you had, whether it was a state legislator or a federal level. Every couple months you could send an email with an update of what you talked about, or a news article that's related. As I said, inviting them out for tours, engaging the community that you serve, your board, donors, anyone in that ecosystem. You want to get them engaged. It's very empowering to learn the process and to learn that my voice matters and I can contribute to this effort. I think that's a really cool aspect of advocacy. And I think you all know that well because you were talking about that earlier. Being persistent, staying in touch, pleasantly persistent. That's what we say all the time. Be aware of politics, both sides of the aisle, very, very important. And never, ever, ever give up. And that's it. We're happy to take questions, or if you just want to close out, that's fine. We'll make sure you have a copy of the slides. Thank you so much.
So as we prepare to close out, are there any questions for our G2G group? I told you guys you were going to be very impressed. This is a very, very comprehensive workshop today. I always love and I learn even more, although I've been involved in the process before, but G2G just does an amazing job of making sure that we understand the 30,000 foot level all the way down to, again, building relationships with our legislators and people who are making those decisions. So we will absolutely provide the slides for you later and the recording. So you can look out for that. And in the meantime, if there aren't any additional questions, I'd like for you to join me in spirit fingers and spirit energy and thanking our G2G team. We appreciate having you here with us today. Thank you so much. And don't forget, in September, they will be back for part 2. Remember, the cycle continues. We have to keep going. And so they'll be back in September to take us through the next part of the state and federal budget cycle. So thank you again, my G2G family. I really appreciate you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful day.